One of the best pass rushers in this year's draft class that posted 14 sacks this past season will have some concerns about his upside against the run at the next level and his three-down ability. However, you can't deny he can get after the quarterback, and it feels like there's even more that could be tapped into at the next level, and that is Donovan Ezeiruaku. So let's get right into it. Diving into Donovan Ezeiruaku, whose last name, that's going to be the last time I say his last name because I'll probably mess it up if I try again, out of Boston College, listed at just over 6'2", 248 pounds, but brings fantastic length to that outside linebacker role at 34.5 inches, which could help some teams with some concerns about his upside at the next level, specifically against run and the play strength that he brings to the table. He's going to be a very interesting case study as he's not going to blow many people away about his athletic traits in terms of the explosiveness. You see this in the play strength. You see this in the get off. However, he's a very successful pass rusher that has an 18% pass rush win rate, which is lower than some of the other top pass rushers in this year's draft class. But noticeably, the 14 sacks speaks to his ability to get to the quarterback and finish. And that is a trait that he carries within his game due to some of his athleticism and some of his bend and his ability to find those smaller creases, which leads to him finishing plays more often than being a true pocket collapser or just a pocket pusher, as actually that's not really his game, is to be a consistent pocket collapser. So Donovan Ezeiruaku is going to be a very interesting spot because there's a lot of things that he does well, but does he excel in the areas that your team is going to be looking for? That's the question. So let's start this thing off, as always, with the first step explosion. And this is an area I currently have a slightly above average grade here, but I definitely don't love his first step explosion or really the explosive aspect of it, though I think the first step can be effective when you see him play with some of the forward momentum off the ball, especially in passing situations. His first step seems to be a lot more consistent. The get off timing seems to be a lot more consistent and more aggressive than it is on early downs, for example. What I do like as well is he plays with very quick feet, short area foot quickness. This does help him get set a little bit quicker against the run. There's upside for that. And also as a pass rusher is that short area foot quickness, which can allow, say, an offensive tackle oversets him to get inside wins. Now, is he constantly going to cause offensive tackles to overset? Not really. So some of the lack of get off, I do feel there's a little bit of delay with some of his first step, both as a pass rusher and as a run defender. Sometimes as a pass rusher, just his timing isn't great, and he looks like he's the last guy off the line. On the flip side, as a run defender, you'll also notice similarly, there's a little bit of delay, kind of the way that he utilizes his footwork. It's not sudden. It's not immediate into the positioning. It's kind of a delay, like a false step, and then he works into his position, which to me will have to be improved at the next level because I think one of the biggest problems he has is he has to be more proactive, specifically against the run, to set himself up much earlier than he currently does to lead to more success at the next level, as he's probably going to play more of an outside linebacker role. His lateral first step is very effective, and this gives him some upside, specifically against zone schemes where he has some of the lateral lean to his game and some of the bend to be able to match that first step of offensive lineman. When you get to the other aspects where he gets into coverage and he doesn't look out of place into coverage, there's a little bit of a swivel to his game. There's a little bit of flexibility there, and it's not a spot where you'd probably want him matching up with guys in coverage, but is he capable of running into the flat? And is he capable of creating some depth and being pretty fluid to transition? He absolutely is. I think he's adequate in those categories. The footwork to deal with flat coverage responsibilities. My issue, and this comes back to that closing ability as a guy that gets sacks, is that I don't think he plays with a ton of closing burst. And you'll see it's a lot more about the angles that he takes to the quarterback, the ability to get flat to the quarterback, rather than the true burst that he carries. And I think this actually shows up more in the open field. This shows up more as a run defender when trying to kind of squeeze down an edge and then collapse on a mesh point. Instead, guys can kind of still get upfield on him as he doesn't bring some of that immediate short area burst. Disciplined player that's super disciplined at the mesh point, gives respect to both the inside and the outside, and he plays it out well for boot action plays or play action fakes. Overall, to me, the explosiveness is just average to slightly above average here in terms of the first step. I do think the other issue is he doesn't cover a ton of depth within his strides, specifically that first step off the ball, which can make him a little bit less threatening of field and kind of minimize some of the inside wins that he can create. Doesn't also have some of the build-up speed or the real just burst around the edge where you can really get an offensive tackle to overset and then open up inside wins even from a wider alignment. Moves you on to the play strength, where for me, I ended up with just an average grade here, and this is both as a pass rusher and a run defender. Now, there's a couple of qualities that I think will translate pretty well, and I also think that against tight ends, the more often he can work on tight ends, the more success you're going to find, of course. But the more often he has to work one-on-one with offensive tackles, the more you're going to see him getting pushed off his spot at the point of attack, and that just typically happens. He doesn't play with much of an anchor at the point of attack. His base will be lost from out from under him, as we'll talk about here in a second. What I do like is that he does do a nice job playing with low pads, and he has an ability to create a lot of half-man opportunities opportunities both as a run defender and as a pass rusher. Now, back to the proactiveness aspect, I think he needs to do a better job, and we'll talk about this more with Shed, at positioning himself to actually open up half-man opportunities against the run. He takes guys head-on too often, and he doesn't position himself in a spot to actually make the play. In terms of as a pass rusher specifically, he has an ability to create half-man opportunities to sink down underneath the pads. He's already playing with some natural leverage at 6'2", but also because of the bend that he also brings to the table, he can really drop underneath tackles, get underneath their hands, and that's one of the ways that he finds the most consistent wins. It also cuts a very tight angle to the quarterback, which is why he has so many sacks that he does, because when he gets back there, he can finish. And then you carry along the length to it. Those things translate really well together. So to me, in general, he just plays too high. I think he just plays too tall. Quick as his feet are, I don't love sometimes his entry. I feel like it can absolutely be inaccurate. You'll see times where his feet kind of get up in the air, and then there's really no anchor that he can create at the point of attack. Not an enforcer at the point of attack. He's not going to create knockback or pushback constantly one-on-one against single blocks, maybe a little bit more so against tight ends, as we'll see. And actually, that's one of the best aspects for him in terms of play strength, is he does a really good job of creating all of the strength through the entire body. It's not just an upper body push that he utilized, because otherwise he wouldn't move anybody. It's through the entire body that once he has contact, he has an ability to convert some power through the ground and really convert some force into contact to at least create some separation from, say, him and a tight end, so he then can try to lock out. Otherwise, against tackles, you don't feel this as often. Fortunately, it translates really to his ability to bull rush the quarterback, sometimes long arm a quarterback. There isn't much of a speed to power conversion within his game whatsoever, and even when he does, as we'll talk about, he loses a lot of speed through those opportunities. You can see him just kind of losing ground. You can see him kind of slowing up into those transitions. It's not explosive. There's not a lot of suddenness to it. And again, the entry could be inconsistent there. And there's also just not a lot of walk back to his game. That's not his game, is to be a constant pocket pusher. He's with a nice base at the point of attack. I think occasionally he doesn't always leverage himself within the lower body. Talk about those entry points. And again, taking on half man a little bit more against the run would help him here. But also, he does play with a nice base width at the point of attack, which allows him to stay pretty balanced. It's just that his pad level tends to rise a little bit more, that he's working laterally. And this will show up a ton in his game, specifically when he's having to work some of those wide zone schemes, is that he doesn't have the best ability to actually stay square to the line of scrimmage and slide up and down the line of scrimmage. So instead, he kind of has to turn and lean and run. And that leads him to not being as, number one, square, but more specifically, keeping a low pad level as he's sliding down the line of scrimmage. I think if he was more proactive to get himself set a lot quicker against the run scheme, rather than kind of having that false step and then getting into a spot very quickly, I think he'd help himself here, and that's what it's going to be about at the next level. He's got to win a lot sooner than he does, specifically against the run, and specifically the wider that he's going to be matched up, he's going to have more opportunities to do that, but he needs to win a lot faster than he does right now. But it's that lateral movement where his pads begin to rise. Of course, you're going to lose a lot of force there, and it really hinders his ability to reset and work back over top of block. The ability to press out offensive linemen is very limited, as well as some of this, the true anchor strength. You'll see that when you watch him against offensive tackles more specifically. It allows him to kind of just look like he's getting engulfed by offensive linemen. The pass rush, because I think he's a very good pass rusher as of now. And it may surprise you with some of the things that I said, that he's this good as a pass rusher. A lot of good as a pass rusher. And we'll start right away with the ability to bend, the ability to turn the corner at the top of the rush. He does this well. He works well through contact. It opens up a lot of half-man success because of his ability to work through strikes, continue to create movement, and continue to bend through the top of the arc. He controls his pace really well. I think this is massive. Plays with a really nice pace to his game as a pass rusher. It syncs the timing with his hands and his feet very well. And that little pace can set up some nuanced wins, the in and out wins, he presses inside, jumps back outside of an offensive tackle, the little subtle nature to it, but also the controlled pace about it is what sells it. He doesn't ever feel like he's rushing himself or he's kind of out of control. Yeah, sometimes the plan isn't always ideal, but for the most part, he's got a very good pace about his game as a pass rusher that can speed it up, slow it down, rush from different alignments, and find success without just beating an offensive tackle to his spot and simply just say, okay, I'm such a threat outside, I'm going to consistently get inside wins, because he doesn't do that right now. Instead, he just plays with a very controlled pace, which also leads to really good balance. He's got an adaptive attack to offensive tackle sets, which is hard to find guys like this. I think it even shows up through games. The more reps he gets against the same offensive lineman, he loses a certain way, he can come back and have kind of a counter off that, what to expect. I think there's an adaptive nature to his game. A lot of this comes back to some of that short area foot quickness, but also just some of the athleticism where he has an ability to adapt to sets kind of on the fly. Okay, jump set, let me see if I can get back inside. He has a really controlled ability to do that. Again, back to kind of the thing that we just hit on, and it allows him to create creases as a pass rusher and find those small little windows as a pass rusher, specifically working on the outside, which is not easy to do. He can get underneath the pads of an offensive lineman. He's pretty much won at that point. He can kind of win through small creases. That being said, though, I don't think he constantly plays as skinny as maybe you would hope. He's got a little bit more of a stouter build, but he doesn't really show his ability to play skinny as often. I think it shows up on stunts. I think it shows up on the inside when he's matched up, you think, with a guard, and he's going to be a problem, where he's not typically a huge problem because I don't think he plays with the kind of slither that you would expect from a guy at his size. He tends to play a little bit too wide, and there's not as much of kind of the slip blocks. Also has a tendency to kind of become a reacher as a pass rusher, the long arm move, even sometimes the bull rush attempts. I think he gets predictable. I think that the pace, as well as he can kind of change paces as a rusher, he can get predictable. One, his entry into bull rush is just too slow. He doesn't carry explosiveness into it. It just is too slow. The transition, the speed to power, it's just too slow conversion as of now, allows the offensive lineman to set. But also within his long arm move, as well as he paces things together with his footwork and his hand usage, it can become a little bit predictable for offensive linemen. There's not always the best suddenness to it. And at times you can kind of feel the setup coming of like, okay, he's trying to get this long arm move set up. And at that point, it becomes a reacher because even though he carries the length, he gets into a spot where he's reaching way too far. He doesn't have the airspace collapsed. And he also wasn't a great threat, say, on the outside threat before kind of working into that move that he wants to set up, which allows guys to get on top of what he's trying to get into as a pass rusher. There has to be more of an urgency, more of a suddenness to kind of catch guys off guard. And I think that there is right now to kind of set up his plans that he wants to get to. You can tell he has different plans to get to. It's just, I think the setup there can be a little bit predictable, which can definitely cause him to be a little bit more of a reacher as a pass rusher. Let's translate well. His skip through moves, the ability to step through as a pass rusher. He covers a ton of depth in those spots. You see the hips kind of get loose in those spots, which allows him to kind of step through. You'll see it in the skip club moves. It's very fluid, and he has a pretty high success rate with some of the skip club moves versus other pass rushers coming out this year that utilize it but don't win as often. It's a little bit slower with some of his inside wins, specifically when an offensive lineman does jump outside and he has an inside setup. He could be a little bit slower to get some of those inside wins, again, lacking some of the suddenness there. To the agility aspect, I think he's slightly above average in terms of agility. I think the biggest thing is going to be the footwork that people are going to love about his agility, but he doesn't feel like he has a ton of shake within his game, really the ability to cover much depth. There isn't much depth created, so it really limits kind of those sidestep moves right now within his footwork, which makes it a problem, right? He has an ability to kind of step through, loosen his hips, create some bend, create some lean, like you'll see that, but we don't see some of the true like natural lateral ability, and this will show up as a movement piece against the run, and will also show up as a pass rusher where he doesn't cover much ground, so it feels like he's kind of just staying in the same spot, which puts a lot of emphasis on his ability to be successful with his hands, and at times there his hands need to be faster, because if he's not going to create the kind of depth which is going to get him clean in some of those sidestepping. Does carry fantastic lean at the top of the rush with a dip to tap along with that, which again opens up a lot of success to kind of flatten. I do think he occasionally has a little bit of a misplaced entry when we're talking about working against offensive tackles, specifically more of the power move setups. Applies his really good footwork within his crossover move as a pass rusher. Another issue for me is that he doesn't carry a ton of speed around the top of the pass rush, and again, this comes into the transitioning, the lack of explosion. He doesn't carry a ton of speed. He's not incredibly threatening. I'm kind of working vertically upfield, so it's important for him to kind of find those tight creases, get really close to an offensive lineman, which I think is what he struggles with right now when trying to create some of his power moves or getting into his long arm, is that there's just way too much space because it's predictable. But it's really important that he finds those little angles and wins through those, because as of now, what he doesn't do really well is create a lot of speed or threatening speed around the corner, and that shows up, I think, also with some of the spin counters, where you'll see why he gets to it, but you don't see a lot of success off of the spin counters, because I don't think he created a great threat upfield, and also within those spin counters, he's just playing too upright. I think at times he feels like he's just kind of standing in the same spot. Suddenness or explosiveness in and out of those transitions either. It's the subtleties as the pass rusher that stands out, right? It's the subtleties and kind of the inside-outside move. It's the ability to kind of use its head usage to kind of settle back inside and then work outside. He can get an offensive lineman to potentially strike, and that opens up real opportunities to get underneath pads. He finds his wins. I would like to see more of an aggressive press earlier in some of his pass rush attempts, specifically when he's trying to set up his inside moves to win back outside, because I feel like right now there's occasions where you'll see kind of an assertive first step and second step, and he presses offensive lineman, and then he can open up the outside moves because he has the footwork to do it. It just right now, I think there's too many opportunities where he doesn't create that kind of threat, and it just feels like he's, again, getting into a predictable entry, but he does carry quick transition ability, and you'll see this more from wider alignments. You'll see this ability to kind of work through traffic. Here comes running back, step through here. He has that agility where he does have the short area quickness to kind of work through, stay controlled, stay balanced as he's working through a lot of traffic, a lot of guys that you send at him, which is pretty darn awesome as a pass rusher. And then there's also the fact that he's a very smooth mover, kind of working his hand usage. He's very fluid as he continues continues to work around the arc. He has that ability within his footwork, that body control, which to me right now is very good. His body control, another huge reason that he finds success, is that ability to kind of slam on the brakes, stop the pass rush in his tracks. And that does open up some spin success, but it's more so right now opening up more counter moves than anything because the spin hasn't really tapped in as often. But he does have an ability to counter off of pass rush sets because of that ability to kind of stop his body control immediately. The problem is the stop-start burst isn't really there. It's not like some of these other guys where they can kind of change pace, stop, and then take off again. It's a real threat. He doesn't threaten as often with the stop-start, but he does have the fluid body control to continue to work through different pass rush paths, be adaptive. Some of the lateral movement to me limits him as a stunt rusher. Whenever he's working on the inside, I feel like he gets a little bit limited working on the inside. There's not nearly as much wins I feel there. I talked about kind of the slither aspect. I think some of the lateral movement limits him here because while he can slam on the brakes, get an offensive lineman off balance, create a good pop at the point of attack, the problem is again, I don't think he has some of that easy shake that can allow him to play low. So for that reason, he doesn't get as many inside wins through stunts that you would maybe expect. And again, one more thing to kind of the bull rush things. I don't think he always centers it up well. He's not always square into those opportunities. And that's where you feel like he's kind of just leaning on a bull rush rather than actually squaring himself up for true speed to power. But also, again, that's not really his game. So you can understand why he doesn't completely square up into those opportunities. But right now, when he's forced to kind of settle in and try to drive you back, there just isn't much that he feels like he can necessarily bank on to find much consistency in those spots, which is going to be just a true limitation, seemingly. To me, I think he's a very good pass rusher. I think there's real limitations here, which is the biggest concern, but he's a closer, he's a finisher, he can get after the quarterback, and we do see that there's a lot of traits that he actually carries that are really fluid and that work well. He's just not going to be your typical pocket collapser. Defensive traits here, but we'll start off with his ability to shed, and right now I have him as a slightly above average grade. I think that some people may have him higher here in terms of ability to just simply get off blocks, and that's understandable. He's very active with his hand usage, which is massive, and you'll see this as a pass rusher, has that ability to continue to string together pass rush moves. You'll see the counters that continue to kind of string together. I think it does show up with the shed as well. He does a few things well here. Number one, he tries to get really leveraged into contact, more so from the upper body than the lower body, but he really tries to leverage his hand usage into contact to find success. I just think that he needs to set himself up for more half-man opportunities because he's not going to create knockback, because he's not going to create pushback and then be able to separate and get off of blocks, especially when he slants inside. Instead, he's going to have to come in with better entry angles so he can just maintain the gap than he does right now. There's a very strong rip move. He does carry the knee bend, which allows him to transition really quickly, transition and shed off of blocks on his toes. He's very balanced, which allows him to redirect really quickly, find his little entryways into different blocks, kind of slip through traffic if he needs to. Problem for me is he gets sealed. He falls behind. He starts to play a little bit upfield. I don't think it's a lack of knowledge of the run scheme. I feel like he's pretty aware of usually where the run scheme is going. Wide zone, he knows it's going wide. He just doesn't stay on top of the wide zone blocks. Proactiveness, because to me the lateral movement's not great, so he's going to fall behind there, and he doesn't have a great ability to reset over those blocks either, which is why you'll see him punch more on the upper body than actually kind of working through contact and trying to roll over top, because he doesn't have those movement skills to do it right now, it seemingly. So he needs to win earlier. He has to win earlier. He doesn't win early enough, which allows him to fall behind. Now what he likes to do, and you'll see this, is he likes to play with a knockback as well as still moving laterally, and I understand that aspect because he does typically play behind the line of scrimmage rather than beyond the line of scrimmage in some of the wider rush schemes where he tries to create kind of a force at the point of attack while also still moving laterally. Just the problem is I don't think he has the movement skills to constantly get back over top of blocks. So he's going to fall behind and contain too often in those spots. And to me, it's just about positioning himself earlier, setting himself up earlier for success. And I think that he'd be more consistent and you'd see more discipline in those spots. I do like how he stays square, flat down the line of scrimmage. He just plays too upright. His pads tend to rise, but he does have to me the lateral movement, especially right off the ball in terms of some of the bend, to position himself early. He does show kind of that short area foot quickness to set himself up immediately at the point of attack. And you'll also see this in the way that he resets, where he gets a little bit inconsistent with his initial entry and the way that he'll kind of work to reset through the rep. And that's another reason why he finds success with his shed, because initially he's going to get his base pushed off his spot, especially against tackles. But it's the way that he continues to work and reset and fight to get himself back down and then reset his hands that allows him to create shed as the play goes on. His core strength to me is above average. He can kind of roll through contact a little bit. Back to the finishing aspect, he's a very low tackler. Now sometimes he's just kind of dropping to his knees, but he tackles low. I think he's a great tackler. I think as of now, from what I've seen, which allows more opportunities to just finish plays and rack up production. Although there is some real legitimate concern about some of the looseness, and you'll see this, how often he ends up on the ground through traffic. I think it's limiting some of his agility. It limits some of the inside wins. And even as a run defender, him dropping to his knees is a little bit of that
tightness and also not some of that flexion in the very lower body to be able to maintain his footwork in some of these tight creases.
And the vision that he plays with seemingly is really good as well. He plays with very good vision, as we've seen so far, in terms of knowing where the ball carrier is. Even if he doesn't properly align himself, he still knows where the ball is. And you'll see those late transitions, kind of spinning off blocks, just finding a way to get to the ball carrier. You're going to see him come from one side of the field to the other and just running somebody down. But you are going to see that he's going to get in on a lot of tackles. And that's, to me, again, why the run stop rate is where it is. And then you get to the hand usage, and I think that he's got good hand usage as of now. I think he works the inside hands free through contact and also plays with pretty locked hands at the point of attack. There's a variety of moves that he can get to. The two-handed chop, that's effective as of now. Again, I thought he resets his hands very quickly into some of those edge sets. He's fast into contact. He tends to enter first on offensive linemen. The problem is I think that he could be a little bit more sudden here instead of kind of just leaving it out there when he's trying to set an edge and being a little bit more predictable. He could be a little bit more urgent. But that being said, he gets his hands out first. He's with very ready hands at the point of attack. You'll see this on tight ends. Sometimes as a pass rusher, I think at times he needs to get his hands ready a little bit quicker. But as a run defender, his hands are pretty ready. Nice nuance to his hand usage where not only can he find break points, and sometimes you'll see this in a club move, he doesn't always show the ability to actually break those opportunities all the time, but instead he can kind of create it through his movement and continue to work. But he also has the flip side where with his hand usage, he can kind of get on shoulders and he can create spacing rather than just trying to find break points. He could try to create spacing through his upper body, and it ties his plan really well together as a pass rusher specifically with a nice little swim up and over move. Again, he has those counters where he can kind of has the control to continue to work things and string things together, the swims, the rip moves. I just want to see more consistent hand placement when he kind of gets sealed up in blocks that we could try to kind of reset. Also not heavy at the point of attack. I think it's average here at best. You just don't see much force at the point of attack. Maybe a little more against tight ends, but it's more throws through his full body, especially after initial contact where he can then settle back in and then recreate. It's not really on the initial contact that he's going to have heavy hands or kind of create, boom, big knockback. Like you're not going to feel that pop at the point of attack through his hand. Just again, he has to play with a more consistent lower pad level, especially when having to work laterally here. So I think Donovan is going to be one of the more interesting draft targets in this year's draft class because for me, I don't think he excels in any of the explosiveness categories and he doesn't play with much play strength, but he does pretty much everything pretty well to great for me. I really don't have any other lower grades. There isn't a single grade that I have that was below average, and I think that you could have put play strength there maybe the explosiveness, but I think that those are both okay. They're sufficient. It's more about everything else. He's good to great in everything. He's, above average in shed ability. He's got good hand usage, maybe even better than that. Body control is very good. His agility is above average to me. I don't think it's great here. I think it's slightly above average. I think some of the lateral movement limits him, but he can definitely work in short areas. His tackling is fantastic. He's a great tackler. He's a very smart player, very good football intelligence. He's got good discipline as a pass rusher and as a run defender. He's got a good motor attached to it. He plays with toughness, and he's a little bit, of an older player, a 4-year senior, but he's not like a 6-year senior, something along those lines. Donovan Ezeiruaku is going to be very interesting because I don't think every team's going to be interested in this fit. Some teams may want more of a true bully pocket collapser, and he won't be that. Other teams may be concerned about his real limitations in terms of his build, but it only takes one team to fall in love here. And I also don't think he plays with, some of the freakish bend, and he really doesn't have an elite trait to his game. I don't see an elite trait necessarily to his game, but I think I see a really well-rounded prospect that should translate pretty well down the road. It's about finding the right spot for a 3-down player. You want him more as an outside linebacker. You want him working on tight ends. The more he has to work on tackles, the more inconsistent it's probably going to look. But he could work on tight ends next level. He could be capable in coverage, and he can get after the quarterback. That's a well-rounded player that may not be elite in any category, but the category that has the best chance of being very good is going to be his pass rush, which typically teams are going to buy into. So because of that, I have Donovan Ezeiruaku with a 6.37 grade. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring today's video.